The Second World War reshaped the world, but its origins lay in Hitler's ruthless ambition. He envisioned a 1,000-year Reich, built on the myth of Aryan supremacy, and the elimination of those he deemed undesirable. Jews, Slavs, Roma, and others faced systematic persecution as Hitler sought to purify Germany. His quest for Lebensraum, living space, meant conquering Eastern Europe, enslaving or eradicating native populations. The world watched uneasily as Germany annexed Austria, then Czechoslovakia. The invasion of Poland in 1939 ignited a global conflict. Blitzkrieg tactics brought swift victories, France fell, and much of Europe was under Nazi control. Britain stood alone, defiant, as Hitler's war machine pressed on. The invasion of the Soviet Union opened a brutal new front, turning the war into a global struggle of ideologies. The stakes were nothing less than the future of humanity. Few could imagine the horrors that would unfold, or what might have happened if Hitler's vision had triumphed. The world teetered on the edge, with the outcome uncertain for years. Hitler's dark vision threatened not just borders, but the very soul of civilization. The fight was for survival, freedom, and the fate of generations to come. The world's response would determine the course of history. The consequences of failure would have been catastrophic. Imagine if history had taken a darker turn. What if Dunkirk had ended in disaster, or the Luftwaffe had crushed Britain's defenses? A Nazi victory was a terrifying possibility, one that would have erased the world we know. The swastika could have flown over Paris, London, even Moscow. The Third Reich would dominate Europe, its influence stretching across continents. Freedom and democracy would be relics, replaced by totalitarian rule. The pursuit of racial purity would continue unchecked. Society would be reshaped by fear, violence, and absolute control. The world would enter a new dark age, defined by Nazi ideology. Individual rights would be crushed beneath the weight of the state. The map, the politics, and the very fabric of life would be unrecognizable. This is the chilling reality of a world where Hitler stood victorious. The implications are staggering and a stark reminder of what was at stake. Thankfully, this future never came to pass, but it was closer than we like to imagine. In this alternate world, Europe's map would be redrawn by force. The Greater Germanic Reich would swallow Germany, Austria, Poland, and parts of Czechoslovakia. Alsace-Lorraine, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway would become German provinces or puppet states. Their cultures would be systematically erased, their resources exploited for the Reich. Britain, if conquered, would be a German protectorate, its empire dismantled. France would be divided, part under collaborationist rule, the rest under German control. Eastern Europe would be carved up for German settlers, native populations enslaved or exterminated. The Soviet Union, if defeated, would be broken into German colonies. Beyond Europe, Germany would seize colonies in Africa, while Japan dominated Asia and the Pacific. The world would be split between two Axis superpowers, an uneasy, dangerous alliance. The United States might remain independent, but isolated and threatened. Global power would shift, liberty and self-determination would be under siege. The ideals of cooperation would be replaced by conquest and subjugation. The world order would be built on fear, not freedom. This is the tyranny that would have defined the new era. Daily life under Nazi rule would be a study in oppression. Aryans loyal to the regime might enjoy jobs and goods, but at the cost of constant surveillance and propaganda. Children would be indoctrinated from birth, molded into tools of the state. For those deemed inferior, Jews, Roma, Slavs, life would be a nightmare of persecution and violence. The Holocaust would expand, with extermination camps operating on an industrial scale. Resistance would be crushed. Fear would rule every aspect of life. Freedom of speech, assembly, and the press would vanish. Art, music, and literature would be censored, serving only to glorify the regime. Education would suppress critical thinking, demanding total conformity. Even privileged Aryans would find their lives dictated by the needs of the state. Women would be confined to motherhood, men to war or labor. Personal ambition would be sacrificed for the Reich. Culture would become a tool of control, erasing diversity and dissent. The threat of violence would hang over all. This was the reality of a society built on fear and absolute power. Science and culture would be twisted to serve the Reich. Military technology, rockets, jets, atomic research would advance, but only for war and domination. Medical science would be driven by eugenics, with horrific human experimentation continuing unchecked. The pursuit of racial purity would define research and policy. Art and culture would be strictly censored. Only Nazi-approved works would survive. Goebbels' propaganda would dictate every film, book, and song. Degenerate art would be destroyed, replaced by works glorifying the regime. Architecture would be monumental, designed to awe and intimidate. Literature and music would become tools of indoctrination. The rich cultural diversity of Europe would be erased. Creativity would be stifled, replaced by a barren, state-sanctioned culture. Science and art would lose their soul, serving only the machinery of oppression. The world's cultural landscape would be bleak and joyless. The United States would face a hostile world, surrounded by Axis powers. Initial isolation might give way to militarization as threats grew closer. America would become a fortress, preparing for inevitable conflict. A new Cold War could emerge, not with the Soviets but with the Third Reich and Imperial Japan. Other unconquered nations would be pressured to choose sides or face subjugation. Resistance movements in occupied territories would fight on, supported by the few remaining free nations. The global economy would fracture, dominated by Axis interests. Trade blocs would compete, fueling tension and instability. International institutions would vanish, replaced by Axis-controlled structures. The world would be gripped by suspicion, fear, and the constant threat of war. Hope would survive only in the courage of those who resisted. The balance of power would be forever altered. The shadow of tyranny would stretch across the globe. The consequences of a Nazi victory would be catastrophic. Genocide would continue on an unimaginable scale. The Holocaust would not end until all deemed undesirable were gone. Freedom of thought, speech, and religion would be extinguished. Human rights would vanish, the individual reduced to a tool of the state. Endless war and displacement would ravage Eastern Europe. Cultural heritage would be destroyed or Germanized. Any order would be built on terror and mass murder. Technological progress would come at the cost of humanity's soul. The suffering would dwarf any supposed benefits. This is the true cost of tyranny, triumphant. Exploring this alternate history is more than speculation, it's a warning. Real Nazi plans, like the Wannsee Protocol and Germania, reveal the scale of their ambitions. Fictional works like The Man in the High Castle help us imagine the consequences. History shows that unchecked power leads to both grand projects and terrible atrocities. The Nazis' vision was not just fantasy, it was a blueprint for horror. Understanding these what-ifs helps us recognize the turning points that shaped our world. The Battle of Britain, Moscow, and D-Day were not just battles. They were moments that saved civilization. The sacrifices made to prevent this dark future must not be forgotten. Studying these possibilities is not about dwelling on fear, but about appreciating the cost of freedom. It reminds us that history could have taken a much darker path. The world we live in was shaped by those who stood against tyranny. Their legacy is a lesson for all generations. We must remember what was at stake. Reflecting on a world where Hitler won underscores the fragility of freedom. History is not inevitable, it's shaped by choices and sacrifice. The freedoms we enjoy were defended against ideologies of hate. Studying even the darkest paths teaches us vigilance. It shows how easily societies can fall into barbarism. The story of World War II is a warning: progress must be defended. By imagining what might have been, we better appreciate what we have. History offers lessons in courage, resilience, and the dangers of intolerance. It encourages us to question, to seek truth, and to value justice. Our collective memory shapes our future. By understanding the past, we can make better choices today. We must reject hate and champion human dignity. The path of history is ours to shape. Let's choose wisely.